On tonight's episode of Verse to the Verse, jump in, strap in, and let's take a trip through the mean streets of California to visit the Valerie Martin case. In February 2003, William Whiteside was living in a mobile home with Valerie Martin, the defendant, who is her son and the defendant's pregnant girlfriend, Jessica Buchanan. Whiteside and Martin worked at Antelope Valley Hospital. The defendant was a white supremacist and associated with other white supremacist groups, including Donovan Casey, Bradley Zoda, Christopher Kennedy, and Stuart Smith. Whiteside's racial background was non-white, and the defendant did not like him because of this. The defendant, his mother, girlfriend, and others were all methamphetamine users. On the morning of February 27th, 2003, Zoda came over to Whiteside's mobile home to get high, while Zoda, the defendant, Valerie Martin, and Kennedy were in a room talking and smoking methamphetamine. Martin said that she owed $300 debt to some Mexicans for the meth, and if she did not pay, the Mexicans would come over. The group discussed options to repay the debt, including stealing cars. While Buchanan was in another room, Kennedy asked Zoda if he was down with it, and they discussed robbing Valerie Martin's old man. It was decided that they would go to the Antelope Valley Hospital parking lot, and Zoda would jump Whiteside and take his wallet when he got off work. Around 9 p.m., Valerie Martin drove Kennedy, Zoda, and the defendant to the hospital. When they arrived and located Whiteside's car, it was determined that the vehicle was too close to the street, and there would be too many witnesses. Valerie Martin suggested an alternative plan. She would drop the other three off at Suge's mobile home, call Whiteside, and ask him to pick them up on his way home from work. The three were dropped off at Suge's mobile home and smoked meth. When Kennedy informed the defendant and Zoda that Whiteside was near the mobile home, they left to meet him. The defendant carried a wooden stick and Kennedy carried a red aluminum bat. Kennedy entered the right rear passenger seat of Whiteside's car. Zoda entered the passenger seat behind Whiteside, and the defendant entered the right front passenger seat. Kennedy and the defendant began striking Whiteside with the stick and the bat. Zoda got out of the car, went to the driver's window, and began striking Whiteside with his fist. Whiteside was struck approximately 28 to 29 times and was rendered unconscious. Kennedy took Whiteside's wallet. The defendant and Kennedy then placed Whiteside in the car's trunk. Kennedy drove them around until they got lost. While they were riding around, they heard a noise coming from the trunk and realized that Whiteside had opened the trunk. Kennedy stopped the car. The defendant got out to close the trunk. Whiteside was able to open the trunk a second time. Kennedy got out of the car with the defendant and beat Whiteside with the stick. They closed the trunk and drove around in an effort to find a familiar land spot. The defendant called his mother and asked her to bring gasoline. When Valerie Martin arrived, Kennedy took the gasoline container and began to dump gasoline all over the car. The defendant lit the gasoline on fire. The defendant accidentally burnt Kennedy. They then returned to Whiteside's mobile home. The defendant, Kennedy, and Zoda took off their clothes and placed them in a trash bag. The defendant took off his skater shoes with red laces and placed them in the trash bag as well. After a while, everyone went to Kennedy's residence where they smoked some drugs. Later, the same morning, several deputies, including Kennedy's uncle, a reserve deputy, came to the residence and arrested Kennedy for a probation violation. The defendant, Valerie Martin, Zoda, and Buchanan left and drove to Rebecca King's mobile home. Casey, a leader of his skinhead gang, was there. After the defendant told Casey what they had done to Whiteside, the defendant and Casey left in Valerie Martin's car, and the defendant obtained money from an ATM using Whiteside's bank card. Upon their return, the defendant gave Martin some money. Casey also accompanied Martin to a check cashing business so she could wire someone else some money. Later that evening, the defendant went to Smith's house with Zoda. The defendant, driving Whiteside's car, drove Smith to Whiteside's mobile home. While at the mobile home, Smith said that they needed to leave because Whiteside was coming home. Defendant told Smith, "Bill's not coming in. We killed him." He also showed Smith his 2M tattoos on the back of his neck. The defendant stayed in a motel for a few days. During that time, he told the details of the murder to Smith. At some point, defendant, Zoda, and Smith went to a dumpster and burnt the plastic bag containing the bloody clothes. Prior to the burning of the clothes, the defendant had Zeta take his black skater shoes out of the bag. The shoes did not have any laces. When Zoda was arrested, he was wearing the shoes. When the defendant was arrested, he was wearing the red shoelaces on a pair of white tennis shoes. Red is the color of white supremacy. On February 28, 2003, a burned-out vehicle was discovered. There was a lighter in the back near the vehicle. Inside the trunk, Whiteside's remains were discovered. Much of the body had been burned away. A partially melted aluminum bat was recovered from the floorboard. An autopsy was conducted, and the immediate cause of death was determined to be smoke inhalation and burns to the body. There were also fractures to Whiteside's skull, which would have been fatal in less than an hour. When Whiteside failed to report to work, his former spouse, Tunda Curry, called Bank of America and inquired about an ATM transaction on their joint account. On March 3rd or 4th, Curry contacted Valerie Martin and told her someone had used Whiteside's ATM card, and photos of the transaction had been requested of the bank. After Valerie Martin's conversation with Curry, she called the defendant in an effort to distance herself from any involvement in the murder. The conversation was recorded, and Martin acted like she had no idea what had happened to Whiteside. The defendant was upset because he knew the police would have pictures from the ATM showing him making a withdrawal. On March 10, 2003, the defendant's girlfriend in Buchanan was interviewed by Detective Kennedy. She indicated that on February 27, 2003, she was in Whiteside's trailer and heard the defendant talking on the phone. The defendant stated that he needed to get $300 for his mother and was going to go whack Bill to get the money. Buchanan said that she went to sleep, and when she woke up, defendant, Kennedy, Zoda, and Valerie Martin were inside the mobile home. They left and went to Kennedy's home. They parked in the garage, and the white pillowcase was taken out of the car. At one point, inside Kennedy's house, she saw blood on the defendant's hands. She also saw blood on Kennedy's arm. Buchanan stated that 3 days later, the defendant and Zoda went back for the white pillowcase and torched it. Thereafter, the defendant got a swastika and 2 M's tattooed on the back of his neck. The tattoo meant that the defendant had killed someone of a different race. 3 to 4 days after the incident, the defendant told Buchanan that he'd killed Whiteside by putting Whiteside in the back of Whiteside's car and beating the hell out of him. The defendant gave her details of the incident, including the beating, arson, and getting the money from the ATM using Whiteside's bank card. He said that he killed Whiteside because he never liked him. Whiteside yelled at his mother, and Whiteside was the opposite race, and the defendant was a skinhead. Buchanan also recounted details of the phone conversation that the defendant had with his mother. Valerie Martin is currently on California's death row, and she's sentenced to death for the robbery and murder of an elderly man. And to us, Valerie Martin, you and your cronies are considered the worst of the worst. And this concludes tonight's episode of Verse to Verse. I'm your gracious host, Marlo, signing off here. And remember, depending on the crime, you can get the needle, you can get the needle, you can get the needle, or the chair. Until next time, please take care.